As Eldari from every corner of their ancient empire wallowed in their most unnatural impulses in the pursuit of debauchery, and the pleasure cults gained a tighter hold over their society, the Eldari became increasingly divided. Those who saw early on the foulness that corrupted their people for what it was became known as Exodites, and they departed to found newly terraformed colony planets called Maiden Worlds on the fringes of their empire. These Exodites were mocked by the majority of their people, for they eschewed much of their race's supreme technologies and returned instead to a simpler and more spiritual way of life, where hard labor was needed to raise food and carry out all the other necessities of survival. And yet, it was the Exodites alone who would wholly avoid the horror that was to follow. Upon their new homes, they could isolate themselves from the Eldari's brewing corruption and hedonism, and survive the cataclysm that would soon consume their people. The Exodites of the 41st millennium live startlingly pre-industrial and primitive lives compared to other Eldari factions like the Asuriani and Drukari, having chosen to abandon the automated labor-saving technologies that long defined Eldari life in return for the spiritual health brought by pursuing the hard labor of survival for oneself. The Exodites learned to once more cultivate crops and harvest other natural resources by hand, like their ancient ancestors, and their societies adapted to a more rigorous and physical culture compared to those of the craftworlds or the webway, who still make use of the Eldari's advanced automated technology to maintain a labor-free existence. Where the craftworld Eldari cling to the past of their race and preserve all they can of their fallen civilization, the Exodites have turned their backs away from ancient tradition in favor of a simpler, harder way of life. The worlds of the Exodites are savage and untamed, their meager settlements coexisting with wild beasts of all kinds. They are too few and too scattered to disrupt the delicate balance of nature. Many are only occupied for a few months of the local year, because on many worlds the Exodites are moving with the seasons and the herds. They time their migrations according to when they must collect and plant their crops, remaining only long enough to gather what they previously planted in the spring, and staying until it is time to plant the following year's crop and set off once again. Creatures that inhabit these worlds are numerous and varied. Most of the Exodite worlds are home to large herds of megadons and other gigantic reptilian beasts they refer to as dragons. These creatures are not native to their regions, as the early Eldari settlers intentionally spread them throughout all their worlds so that they are now quite common. The Exodites follow these herds as they graze, carefully managing them for food, not only partaking of their flesh, but of their blood as drink, skins as clothing and leatherwork, and bones and horns, which act in part as substitute for psychoplastic substances such as the wraith bone used by the craftworld Eldari. Dragons are diverse and contain different kinds of species, some of which are unique to specific worlds and used in different ways according to their size and nature. The massive herbivores known as megadons are slow-witted and easy to manage, although deadly if panicked or mistreated. These creatures provide most of the material resources used by the Exodites. Smaller megadons are used to transport cargo and people across the great plains of their worlds. A large megadon, on the other hand, is capable of carrying a massive structure on its back, bearing the most enormous weight without concern. The smaller carnivorous dragons ridden by the Exodites warriors, called Dragon Knights, are used to herd and control the herbivorous megadons. These warriors are so adept as to be practically born into the tall dragon saddles, consummate riders, wielding their long lances with ease. A stab with one of their lances will turn or stop a megadon without causing it any harm, but the same blow would knock the most hardy Eldari to the ground, lifeless. Such warriors are an integral part of Exodite societies. They play an important role as protectors of each community, as well as acting to safeguard their valuable resources from predators and the like. Like the Asuriani and their infinity circuits, the Exodites rely on psychoactive crystalline technology to protect their souls from consumption by the thirst of the chaos god Slaanesh upon death. Their worlds are crisscrossed by a network of crystalline stone circles and menhirs that act as world shrines where the Exodite fallen can have their souls merge from soul stones after death with what is known as the world spirit. The diverse peoples of the Eldari have each created their own measures to avoid their spirits being consumed by Slaanesh. The Asuriani wear psycho-crystalline spirit stones that act as safe havens for their souls at the moment of their deaths. These spirit stones are then interred within a craftworld's infinity circuit, a haven where the dead are protected from the great enemy's clutches while still able to communicate with the living. The Harlequins pledge themselves to Kegorak, the laughing god who collects their souls, while the Drukari ensure others suffer so they do not. A devil's bargain that only postpones their fate. However, there is a new faction of Eldari who believe they have a way of not just avoiding the predations of Slaanesh, but defeating the Chaos God entirely. The Ynnari, or Reborn, are a rising force that pay heed to ancient Eldari belief that as more and more of their race die and their spirits pass into the infinity circuits of the craft worlds, they might form a Gestalt consciousness. When every last one of them passes, they will awaken and empower the birth of a new being. Ynnari, the Whispering God, the Eldari god of the dead. That baleful presence will be strong enough to destroy Slaanesh, so ending the dreaded curse that the Dark God has held over the Eldari since its loathsome birth over 10,000 years ago. The High Farseer Eldred Ulthran of Ulthwé attempted to begin this awakening process early at the Battle of Port de Mesnes in 999 M41, but his plots only stirred the sentience in the warp that would become Ynnari. Soon after, on the night of revelations in Kegorak, a fraction of the Whispering God's will and power was imparted into a single soul, Yvraine, the daughter of Shades. In that instant, she became a conduit for deathly energies, a reservoir of Eldari spirits that live on within her. This power could be attained by all who pledged themselves to the service of Ynnari. No longer would death hold any fear, as the souls of the departed would be harnessed not by spirit stones or other such technological means, but by the living themselves. Acting as the chosen prophet and emissary of Ynnari, Yvraine has traveled across the galaxy, visiting craftworlds, far-flung Eldari corsair fleets, and hidden nooks of the webway. With every passing day, the Ynnari grow in number, attracting followers from a wide variety of backgrounds who believe that the cycle of death and rebirth could be their salvation. Although a young movement, the Ynnari have already shaped the galaxy, most notably by their instrumental role in the resurrection of the Ultramarines Primarch Robert Guilliman, to lead the Imperium of Man during the events of the Ultramar campaign of the 13th Black Crusade. And yet, many amongst the Eldari, particularly among the always self-serving Drukhari, have rejected the Ynnari, seeing them as misguided and dangerous. Yvraine and the Reborn have pressed on regardless, seeking to reunite the time-lost Eldari artifacts known as the Crone Words, so that they may act as the focal point for Ynid's full awakening. Only then can the surging tides of chaos be turned, and a united Eldari race saved and restored.